We did Massive X, and now we are throwing it back to OG Massive. And today, I'm going to show you how to use everything. The goal of this video is to not only get you familiar with the plugin, but also creating your own patches, and most importantly, knowing how to adjust presets to better fit your song. We're going to break down this plugin by sections, talk a bit about each one, and at the end, we'll check out some presets and see if we can understand how the parameters are being manipulated just by looking at the main page. Let's dive right in. So here we are in Massive Standalone, and we're just going to take this one module at a time, starting with the header here. First, we have our logo. If we click that, you can see which version you're on and get some info about the plugin itself. If you click the NI emblem, it also does the same thing here. If we go to File, you have a couple different options. You have New Sound. This will just reset it to a blank template, which is probably one of the best ways, in my opinion, to start from a new sound. You have Open Sound, recent files that you can access different presets that you may have used or saved. Save as, pretty standard settings. You have Import KSD Sound, and what that is these are presets that Massive used to use, so you can import older presets and convert them to the new file format. Below that, we get to our options menu. Massive options here. You can put a default author in, so if you want to put your name here every time you create a patch and save it, it'll automatically be there. You can, as you see, apply that to new sound, save sound as. Here you have some user data tracking. You can decide to turn that on or off. If we go over to MIDI, this is our MIDI setup. We're going to get into this a little bit later on, but for anything that you save, different parameters that you save to your MIDI controller, you can actually recall different MIDI setups. So that's really convenient. You can name them. Then we get to the browser. Here, I'm going to show you how this works when we get to the browser section, but you can add different folders for your user library, rebuild your database if you need to. Pretty straightforward stuff there. Let's keep going. I think this is important to touch on. This is your audio and MIDI setup. You can set your audio outputs, sample rate, things like that, your routing for your audio, and your MIDI routing. So if you have a MIDI controller, you're going to want to go in here and make sure those are turned on. If we keep going, you have some help. So if you need any info on Massive, you can go here and check out the knowledge base, the manual, things like that. Below File, we get to Voices. This shows you how many voices are being used within the plugin. So if I play one note, it's one voice. I can keep playing. You can see the voices go up. You can change how many voices are used per note, and we're going to get into all of that as well. Next to that is MIDI. You can set your MIDI channel. Currently have it set to all. Then we get to CPU. It shows you how much CPU you're using. This is a MIDI panic button. So if you have a note that's just stuck and won't turn off, you can just click here and it'll stop all the notes. Above that, we have our file browser. These are for all of our presets, so you can skim through them here. If you have a long list, it's going to be a bit chaotic. So we will check out the browser in a moment here. You can also use these arrows to go up and down. And you have save as right here as well. And now let's go into the next part, which is the view tab. Here you have three different views. The first one is the synth, which is what we are looking at right now. Then we go to attributes. The attributes tab is there in case you are creating patches or saving presets. You can actually label them and it will save with all these attributes, which makes it really easy to recall later on. So if you wanted to save something to a specific expansion, or if you wanted to save something with piano, maybe it's a clavinet and it's synthetic, you can type in all your info here. Boom. So you have all these different options for saving with attributes, and then when you save it and you recall those sounds, all the attributes will show up in the browser. So let's go to the browser tab, which looks similar to the attributes, and that's because you can actually browse by attributes. So you can click on different expansions or different types or subtypes. So I can say synth. I can go to sync lead. We can keep going to FM, and then it's going to show me all of my presets within those attributes. This is the part I want to talk about with the options menu, because I think it's important to turn this on, and it's a feature that I like to use. So in here, if you go to browser and we go to database, you have two different options: indicate empty categories, and this will just eliminate the categories that don't have any presets with those attributes. So that's one really nice way to browse. So you're not clicking on things and getting to no presets within the browser because you have too many attributes selected. The other way is show count as number, which does both essentially. It removes any attributes that don't have sounds in them and also shows you the amount of sound presets within those attributes. So if you're selecting, you're going to see these numbers slowly decrease based on what it is. So I like to leave this on because it shows me how many sounds are inside each bank or attribute and just makes it a little bit easier to browse. So next to this little search icon here, we have sounds. And if we click sounds, you can actually go through your computer's file library and have presets in different folders. So if you have a different folder saved in your documents with all types of presets, you can actually find them right here. It's really easy. These are all my expansions, so I can just go to Massive Sounds and find them here. You can also right click and choose different options for how it's sorted by. If we go back to search, you can also do that here. Again, you right click, you can add different things in here. You can search for sounds, and what's really cool about this is if you're searching, it doesn't just search for the name pluck. You'll notice there's other presets here that don't have pluck in the name, but if an attribute is tagged with pluck, it's going to show up there. So again, just another way to quickly browse presets. The next part here is programs, and programs are really great, especially if you're in a live setting or you're doing a session and you want to save a whole bunch of presets and recall them for that specific session. What you can do is actually drag different presets here. I'm going to drag a couple over. And then you can save this as a program. So I can save this wherever I want and then recall it later. You can have 128 different presets here. And if we turn the programs on, you're going to notice here in the browser, it only shows you those presets. So you can actually MIDI map this if you want to scroll through just these presets, and then that way you know exactly which sounds you're going to get to next. Again, great for live. If you have one sound and then you want to recall another preset, this is perfect for that. And you can save programs, turn them on and off. It's really easy to use. It's also good to note that if you right click on these, you can remove them or remove all. We are now moving to the audio modules, and before we talk about all these oscillators, let's just break down what an oscillator is. An oscillator is a device or an electronic device that produces a signal or frequency. Oscillators can have different wave types, such as sine waves, saw waves, square waves, and more. To show an example, we're going to use an oscilloscope, and we're going to start with the sine wave, which is the most basic and fundamental wave. It has no harmonics, and this is what it sounds like. You'll notice as I play higher pitch, the oscilloscope shows the waves moving faster. If I play a lower pitch, you can see they're much more spaced apart. So lower notes can be defined by a slower moving waveform, and higher notes can be defined by a faster waveform. Now, within Massive, you have different wavetables. And this is really cool because it allows you to blend different types of waves together. So here I'm on a sine wave and square wave, and let's just see what that sounds like and how it changes when I move the position of the wave. You can see how it turns into a square wave, and a square wave introduces more harmonics, so you get a bit of an edgier or brighter tone to it. And there's multiple different types of waves. We can try a sine triangle wave. You can see it's a triangle. And then it goes back to a sine wave when I move the wavetable position knob, and you can blend between these. So this gives you a lot of options for actually being able to shape your own wave type. There's also all sorts of really cool wavetables. Here's Screamer. So you can see all the different types of waves that are happening on the oscilloscope, and I think it's a really great way to explain how the oscillator actually works. This is the oscillator here. You have 3 different knobs. This is your wavetable position, as I just showed you. You have intensity and amp. And within the oscillator, you have a few other controls. Pitch, which will change the overall pitch. For instance, that's a low C. We can go up 64. Now it's a high C. You can also go down 64. If you double click, you can just reset it. And up top here, you'll notice you have your wavetables, as I showed you, all these different wavetables, and you can switch between them with the arrows here. You also have wavetable modes, and there's a few different modes, and this really gives you a unique way to shape your sound. So on spectrum, you'll see let's go back to a sine wave. So we can shape it to a square, and we can change the intensity. So now you're getting part sine, part square just by using the intensity knob, and you can really play with all three of these and again shape your sound. You also have amp control, which controls the overall volume. Let's go through another wavetable mode. Here is bend, and I'm just going to put this back to a sine wave. We'll set this all the way down, and I'm going to turn it up. And you can see how it bends the waveform. We can go to, let's do bend negative, which will do the opposite, bend the other way. And if we do bend negative positive, when this is set in the middle, basic sine wave, now it bends positive, now it bends negative. And you also have formant. Really affects a basic sine wave. It makes it really, really unique. So those are your options up top. We've already gone over pitch. Here you have a slider, and this is for the filter output. This determines where the oscillator is going to filter 1 or filter 2 or in the middle. You have options to choose here. You can also turn these oscillators on by simply clicking right here. You can turn them all on or off. You'll notice that the two oscillators below it are identical. There's nothing different about them. You have 3 oscillators in massive, and you have all the same wavetable options, all the same modes, and same options for each. Now, we're going to talk about these little boxes underneath all of these settings, but for right now, let's move on to the modulation oscillator. The next in the chain is modulation, and this is a modulation oscillator. What it is it's a sine wave that you can't audibly hear, but you can use this oscillator to modulate your other oscillators. And you have a few different modes here: ring modulation, phase, position, and filter. You can have multiple modes selected, but they can only be applied to one oscillator at a time. This is your control for each mode, and you'll notice when I click on different ones, it changes. You have pitch, and let's just go ahead and start with the first one, which is ring modulation. Ring modulation combines 2 audio signals and creates frequency components within the signal. What you're hearing is basically the sum and difference of various frequencies from the 2 signals. It's basically a metallic or bell-like sound when you start using ring modulation. So let's just see what that sounds like. And I'm just using a basic sine wave here. I'm going to click oscillator 1. So now this is modulating oscillator 1 with another sine wave. And as I turn it up, you'll see how the oscillator reacts. So what's happening here is it's basically going up an octave. But if you change the pitch, that's where things start to get a little interesting. So let's go up 6 semitones. And I'm going to turn this down, and we're going to introduce it again. Now it's like you're hearing 2 voices from this one oscillator, and that's because this sine wave is modulating the first oscillator. Once again, you can apply this to different oscillators, but you can only have one selected at a time. Phase modulation, which is sonically equivalent to FM or frequency modulation. It's used in lots of synthesis. We're going to put this on oscillator 1, which is a basic sine wave for now. I'm going to turn the phase knob up, and you're going to see how it introduces additional harmonics in the actual wave. So let's do that now. Let's try it on a square wave. And when you change the pitch, again, it drastically changes the sound. Especially if it's something that's, one semitone off, not, if you do a third, it's going to sonically sound great. At least a bit more pleasing. So you can apply that to one oscillator at a time. Let's turn that off, reset our pitch by double clicking, and go to position. Position modulation basically allows you to modulate this position of the wavetable. So to do this, let's just select a crazy wavetable. And let's turn the position up. We're set on oscillator 1. So now what's happening is this sine wave is modulating the wavetable position. And again, if you change the pitch, you can really hear it. And I think a good way to really explain how this works is let's lower the pitch all the way to -64. Again, if it has a lower pitch, the actual waves are going to be longer and slower. So you're going to hear the sound wave actually moving this wavetable position. It's basically like me moving this back and forth really fast. So that is position. And the last one here is filter FM. All right, so we're going to go back to a basic sine square wave. I'm going to turn our filter on and add a low pass filter. And now we are going to use the filter frequency modulation, and it's going to modulate the filter with frequency. Let's change the pitch. And again, if we bring this all the way down, it's going to sound like a low frequency oscillator going really slow with the filter. So that is filter frequency modulation. You can apply it to filter 1 or filter 2. We're going to get to those in just a moment. In the audio modules, we also have a noise generator. And to show this, I'm going to turn the oscillator off, and we're going to turn the amplifier up. That is white noise. You also have a color option here, which basically shifts the frequency spectrum up or down. You get some really cool effects. You can change through a few different noise options here. And this also runs through the filter, so you can say filter 1, filter 2, double click to reset it in the middle. And the noise also runs through your amplifier, so the envelope does control the noise. So if I pulled the release up, and we're going to talk about the envelope, but if I pull this up, you can make cymbals. And things like that. Again, we're going to talk about all the envelopes, but that is the noise generator. You can turn it on and off here, and let's keep cruising. The next module here is feedback, and it basically allows you to route the output signal back into itself and gives you some really unique abilities here. So right now I'm just using a basic saw wave. We're going to turn feedback on and turn it up. You could see how it clipped on the oscillator, and now it's going to keep going back into itself. I'm not doing anything else with any other oscillators. This is just one going through feedback. And you can actually change the routing of the feedback so it can go through insert effects first and then to feedback, or it can go before the amplifier. So for instance, let's put an insert effect before it, and let's just use a delay. Lot of really cool things you can do by using the feedback, and this also runs through the filter, and you can change that here. After feedback, we have our insert effects. These are just different effects that you can use on your audio modules. There's a couple different ones here: bit crushers, frequency shifters, sine shapers. Let's just give something a try here. You have two insert effects. They are the exact same as far as which effects you have, but you can stack them on top of each other or route them in unique ways. So you can see we have insert 1 going here. We could put insert 2 over here. And again, we're going to get into the routing page, but those are your insert effects, and there's different distortions and frequency modulation and things like that. Moving on to the filter section, I like to think of this as one module. And within this module, you have two filters. They are identical, nothing different about them. If you click the drop down, you have different filter options. Let's just put a low pass filter here and a high pass here. I'm not going to go through all of them again. Definitely check them out. There's some really cool filters in here. Here we have our faders for volume of the filter. This is a mix knob which blends between the two filters to the output. So if it's all the way up, you're only going to hear the sound coming out of filter 1. If it's all the way down, you're only going to hear the sound coming out of filter 2. If it's in the middle, you're going to hear both of them. This fader here determines the signal path. So if it's all the way up, this means it's running in series. So your sound would be going through filter 1, then to filter 2, then to the output. And you can adjust the setting based off your mix and the volumes. You have lots of control there. If it's all the way down, they are running parallel. And what that means is it's going from your sound source, splitting to each filter, and then going to the master output. So lots of options. Don't forget you have control on your audio modules to decide which filter those are going to. So you can have oscillator 1 going just to filter 1, oscillator 2 going to filter 2. You have lots of control here. We're going to start by putting this on series, sending this oscillator only to filter 1, which would then pass into filter 2, and we're going to set the mix only to filter 2. So we're not going to hear anything from filter 1 until it passes through filter 2. We have a low pass on the first one and a high pass on the second one. So this is the first step in the signal chain. This is the next step. So you notice how the high pass controls the overall sound that's going to the output. Now if we put this in the middle, you're going to hear a blend of both. So you're hearing both filters now because this mix knob is in the middle. If we put it all the way to the top, this doesn't do anything because we're only hearing the output of filter 1. And another example, if we put this on parallel, we set this in the middle here, the sound is going from the oscillator. We're going to want to put this back in the middle so it's sending to both filters. So now the sound is going from the oscillator to each filter individually and then to the output. And see how that shapes part of the sound, and this is going to shape the other part. So again, a lot of control with the filters. You can run them in series, you can run them parallel, you can do a blend of both, you can change the volumes of each, but that's a general idea of the filters. Let's just put a screen filter on here to check that out. That's definitely one of the coolest ones. Now let's move on to the amp section. Here we have our output module. I like to think of this as one little section here. We'll start with the amplifier, which is always controlled by default with envelope 4. You can change that, but this controls the envelope of the amplifier and determines how your sound is going to be shaped using ADSR. We're going to talk about envelopes soon. Next to that, you have pan. After that, we get to bypass. Bypass is actually a really cool feature because it allows you to take an oscillator and bypass all of the filters and effects and send it directly to the output. And you can do that by going to routing, and you have the little B here, and you can choose which audio module is going directly to the bypass. You can only have one audio module selected at a time. So for now, we're going to do oscillator 3, and for oscillator 1, we're going to run it through a filter. So we know what it sounds like, and I'm going to put a delay on it. I'm going to talk about the effects modules in a moment, but let's just put this delay on and turn this up. You can hear it delaying. Now let's turn up the bypass, and what you're going to hear is oscillator 3 is going to go directly to the output. So you're going to hear me push the key, you're going to hear the oscillator, but you're not going to hear it delay because it's not getting processed by any of the effects or filters or anything. Notice how the delay is only happening on the first oscillator, which is going through everything. Oscillator 3 is getting bypassed, going directly to the master output. This is really useful if you had pad or some cool atmospheric sound, but you also wanted some sub bass, but you didn't want your sub bass to get modulated or affected in any way, but you want it all in one patch. You can have bass coming through directly to the output with just an oscillator and have everything else getting processed. Also with the bypass module, you can determine how it's routed. So if you do want it to go to effect 1 first, you can do that, or effect 2, or just the EQ or just the output. You have those options, but again, we're going to get into that when we talk about the routing page. So that's the bypass feature. Next to that, you just have your master output, which controls the volume of everything going to your DAW or your speaker system, or however you have your output set up. Since we added an effect, let's talk about the master effects. You have 2 master effect slots. Here you can determine which effect you want. You can turn them on and off here. And you'll notice in this first bank, you have some tube simulators, which sound really great. You also have things like a dimension expander to expand the stereo image, flangers, reverbs, choruses, things like that. And with each effect, you have a different set of parameters. So if I click on a flanger, you'll see there's another one. If I click on a reverb, you can see all these parameters change. Again, you have 2 effects. This one, the menu is going to be slightly different as you lose some of those tubes, but you do have a majority of the effects right here, and you can turn them on, change all the settings however you want. Next to that, we have an EQ. The EQ is pretty straightforward. It's a low shelf, a high shelf, and in the middle you have a boost, which is basically a bell EQ band, and which frequency you want to boost. So it's pretty straightforward, but everything is going to pass through the effects slots before it goes to the master output. The center page of Massive, there's a lot going on here, and we're going to break it down one piece at a time. There are tabs up here, which we're going to get into after, but starting out, we are going to talk about envelopes. And you can see you have 4 envelopes here. And let's just start by talking about what is an envelope and how it affects the sound. There are 4 phases to this particular envelope: attack, decay, sustain, and release. We're going to start with attack, and what this is how long it takes the sound to reach its maximum amplitude based off when you trigger the note. So with a shorter attack, it's going to be instant and sound like this. See how it just comes in right away? And with a longer attack or slower attack, it's going to sound like this. See how it slowly fades in. You can control the attack level right here. So this will determine basically the slope of the curve or how loud you want the sound to get to. So you can control the curve here. It's a little bit more parabolic now. The next phase is decay, and I think it's important to understand decay and sustain at the same time, because decay is the moment after attack, and that gets you to the sustain phase. So with the decay turned down, that is the level the sound is going to drop to after attack and how it's going to hold with sustain. So you'll notice it's going to go loud and it's going to drop down to a lower volume. And as I hold the note, that's the sustain volume. So that's where the level stays at based off sustain. And if I turn this up, you'll notice you're not hearing any decay because it's straight from attack to sustain. It's the full volume. If I turn it down, and then we can shorten the decay. Slowly goes down, or it can happen fast. So that is decay. And then after decay, we get to our release, which is when you release a note, how long it takes the sound to ring out after the note is released. Make it really long. See, it's slowly fading down there. Massive gives you some really cool ways to shape your sound within an envelope by using a sustain loop. And to do this, we're gonna turn loop on right here. You can just click and drag this up. And this number goes from 1 all the way to infinity. If you keep dragging up. For right now, we're gonna leave it on 1. I'm going to change this to a curve, and now you can see this is what's going to happen after my decay phase. We can change the length of the loop. Here, going through all those phases. And you also have level here. And what's cool is they give you a morph option. So you can actually have different shapes and morph between them. This is just the lower, just the higher, and a blend of both. So right now it's just playing one loop. If I change this to 30 and I hold the note, it's going to do it 30 times. So this is a really cool way to shape using an envelope, especially when we get into actually placing envelopes on different filters and other parameters within Massive. There are a few other controls inside the envelope that I want to talk about. The first one is you have some presets here, some factory presets that you can click through, different loops. Cool vibrato, and you can go back to a simple ADSR. So that we have save, so you can save different settings if you want. You can delete them. Here we have trigger 0 reset, and to show this feature, I'm going to set the attack very long. I'm going to turn the decay up, and the release, I'm going to make it very long. And how this feature works is when I trigger a note, if I trigger a note right after it, it's going to play at the level of the previous note's release. And that's with this disabled. So you'll notice when I play a note and then I play multiple notes after, the volume is going to maintain that level. It's not going to restart from the beginning. See how it doesn't reset the note? Now if I turn this on, every time I push a note, it's going to reset the envelope so it starts from the very beginning. And that's trigger reset. The next thing we have is linear. This controls how parabolic the curve is for decay. So you can see right now it's like a straight line. If this is off, it's more parabolic. To explain gate, I've selected stuttering under the presets for ADSR. How gate works is when I hit the note, it is going to run through the attack, decay, and then stay at sustain until I release the note, and then it will finish the release stage like this. As I held the note, it stayed at sustain. When I let go, it released. Then you have one shot. Regardless of how long you hold the note, it's going to run through the envelope one time and then be done. Then we have hold. This is just going to keep the note on the entire time. There are 3 other options within an envelope that we're going to talk about, but before I do that, I want to talk about how to modulate an actual parameter within Massive. And I want to show you this before we get into LFOs and performers and things like that, so you know the concept behind what I'm doing as I do it. We've been wondering this whole time, there's all these little boxes underneath different parameters. You saw it with the oscillators, you saw it with modulation, effects, and these are modulation sources. So what you can do is click on these little crosshairs from any of the sources, whether they're LFOs or envelopes, and drag them to the parameter you want to modulate. Now you'll notice there's a little 1 underneath. You can have up to 3 modulation sources per parameter. You also have a sidechain option, which we're going to get into, but let's just start by modulating this filter with envelope 1. What you do to turn on the modulation is you click on the number and you drag up or down, and this determines the direction of the modulation. So if we have it like this, how this is going to work is our filter is going to start here, it's going to follow this envelope, and it's going to turn up. Let's see what that sounds like. Let's make it more drastic. And let's set the decay to 100. So now you'll see it's starting low, it's following the attack all the way up, then it's sustaining at the highest part of the filter. We can also go the other way. Now you'll see it's starting here and then slowly filtering down. We can make that even slower. Now let's talk about these other settings within the envelope now that we have a modulator on one of our parameters, which is the cutoff. This first one is delay, and it's the first option within an envelope, and this basically just delays the attack phase from happening. So you're going to hear the sound trigger, and then after the delay time, it's going to start the attack phase. So it's just a simple delay for the attack phase. So let's turn that back down. Next we have velocity, and this is going to determine how the envelope engages with the parameter based off how hard I push the key. So let's turn this all the way up. I'm going to play the note hard. See, it goes straight through the envelope to the open point of the filter, and now let's play it soft. It doesn't go all the way to that open point. So that's velocity. The next option here is key tracking, and how this works is it changes the modulation based off higher or lower octaves. So I have modulator 1 controlling the cutoff, which is this envelope, and this is what it sounds like. Slowly filters down after I play a note. Now, if I turn key tracking on, you're going to notice the higher notes don't go through the modulation of a filter. The sound is pure, it's not getting processed by the filter. If I go to a lower octave, you're hearing that modulation, so that's how key tracking works. Again, it's just based off the keyboard and which octave you're playing in or which note, whether it's higher or lower. Inside these little boxes, you can right click and you have different options. You can turn it off, that's how you remove it. You can also select your modulators here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which correspond to the numbers down here. So you'll notice if I select 5, it's going to be green, matching the LFO. If I select a macro, it's going to be yellow, matching the macros down here, which we're going to touch on. You can also mute them temporarily, and you can unmute, so it's really easy. The other option here are key groups, which are in this section down here. So let's talk about sidechain for a minute. I'm going to put the envelope back on. We're going to turn key tracking off, and let's just set our envelope. That'll work. Down here we have our macro controls. They're additional modulation sources and allow you to control different parameters based off these dials right here. I'm going to get into this a little deeper, but for now, I'm going to put this modulation source on the sidechain. And if I turn this up, this is just going to act just like the envelope filter. So I'm going to mute this. So if we play a note, it's just like me doing this. Same thing. Let's turn the envelope filter back on, and we're going to click SC or sidechain underneath. And now this knob here is going to control the amount of modulation based off where it's set. You have the option to go positive or negative. So let's just leave it as positive and see what happens. No modulation. I'll turn it up. Full modulation. You can set it to the middle. Or you can reverse it, as I said. Now it's negative, so down is technically full modulation. And up is no modulation. And what's cool about this is you don't just have to use these macros. You can put LFO 5 to sidechain the envelope. So lots of control here as far as what you want to modulate, and you can have modulators modulating modulators. Moving on to the next modulator, an LFO. First off, what is an LFO? It's a low frequency oscillator, and it's similar to what I described earlier with a regular oscillator, but because it's such a low frequency, the waves are moving very slow and they're very spread out, which is what makes it audible, especially when you use it to modulate a specific source. This is our LFO. To start, let's just add a filter and drag this modulation to the cutoff. Now you'll notice when I drag this up, it's actually bipolar because LFOs can move in two different directions. Now let's just see what that sounds like. Here in our main window, we have multiple options. I want to start right here with the X fade curve, and this allows you to pick between two different shapes or waveforms with your LFO. So if it's all the way up, we're using this waveform. It's all the way down, we're using this one. If it's in the middle, we're blending both. Now you can change the position of these waveforms by simply clicking and dragging left or right. And then you can start at the top. Or you can start at the bottom. You can change these waveforms. Here's a few simple ones right here, the most common. And then you also have some crazier waveforms. And you get those options for both the first and second waveform type. Over here we have our rate. This determines how fast or slow the LFO will travel. Below that we have sync. What sync does is it allows you to sync it to a specific division or your project's BPM. 16th notes, here's 8th notes. Below that we have position, and what this does is it switches between the ratio based off the phase of the wave. So with this on, as I switch through the ratio, it's going to be very abrupt and it's just going to change to the next speed. Here's what it sounds like. And this is what it sounds like with it off. It's going to be very smooth and it's going to transition on the next trend of the wave. Below that we have restart. This just restarts from the beginning of the wave every time as opposed to it just being random and running. So if I turn that off, with it on, it's consistent every time. Below that, we have our amplifier. This determines the level of modulation on the source. A little bit of LFO. Full on. Moving down to the end here, we have an internal envelope. It's similar to the envelopes I described earlier, but it's simply an attack and decay. When decay is all the way out, it's infinite. So you can do something like put this on the rate, and let's modulate the rate up. It's going to follow the attack and then stay. Or you can do the opposite and maybe do a downtrend. Now it's going the opposite way. So that's just an internal envelope for you to use. Up top here, we have some simple parameters, LFO presets, save, delete, just like the envelope. We have mono. Now how mono works is right now, if I play a note and then add in multiple notes, it's gonna start the LFO at the beginning every single time. Let's see what that sounds like. It's all random. Now, if you turn mono on, the next note is going to come in on the next phase. So it kind of groups them all together and it sounds nice and pleasing. And that's our LFO. Now, there's modulation options here. You can put modulators on the X fade curve and turn that up. You can pretty much modulate anything, the amp. So again, lots of control. You can get really creative with how things are modulating other things. Another good thing to note is that you can put these modulators on anything. So for instance, I can put this over here on the oscillator pitch, and let's say we wanted to oscillate an octave. We can go even more than that. So you can really modulate anything from waveform types or different effects, your amp. You have tons of options for modulation. Within an LFO tab, you can actually switch between an LFO, a performer, or a stepper. So now let's go to the performer and we're going to check this out. This is basically a 16-step performer. We're going to drag this to the filter again because I think that's one of the best ways to show these examples. Let's just turn this up and see what that sounds like. So you can see how it just goes to the next step each time. Let's turn the rate up. So similar settings in this first part. You have the sync option, amplifier, and now let's move over to the main section here. These are different curves, and you have two options with the X fade, just like the LFO, the top or the bottom. You can hear how they're different. Let's just slow it down a little. Nice triplet. Now these curves, you can draw in different ones or different levels. You can blend between them. Or you can do just the bottom one. You can change your curve types up here by hitting load curve. Now you have all these different curves to choose from. See what that sounds like. It's almost like a ratcheting effect. And what's really cool is you can choose different parts of the sequence to use the top one while you're using the bottom. So if this is down here, we can unclick this. Now it switches to the top. We can do that here. Very cool. You can also do things using the amp mod here, like mute certain steps. So if this is turned down, you can click this. I like to follow the little boxes here, and that's kind of what they open up to. See how it muted that ratcheting step? You can do that on these. And you can also click and drag. So those are some options within the performer. Same thing with the LFO. You have presets you can select from. Save, delete, you have random, and within random you can decide what you'd like to random, whether it's the upper levels, the upper curves, lower levels, you can randomize all. And then you have mono, as I showed you before. I went ahead and drew in a simple curve here because the last thing I want to explain in the performer is how you can change the amount of steps. If you click and drag, you can shorten them. And you can use this little yellow flag here and drag this over to start on a different step. You'll notice how it goes back to the first one and continues through. You can also drag from the beginning and turn the intro steps off. So it's really easy to just go in here and adjust the step length by simply dragging for what you need. Within the Performer tab, just like the LFO, you can change this to a stepper or step sequencer. It's 16 steps, and I think the best way to show this is to turn it off on the filter, and let's drag this over to the pitch. I'm going to change it to 12 semitones, and let's just draw in a random design here. Make it a little more drastic. So right now they are random values. You can click snap to grid or hold option when controlling these and they'll snap to exact values. So now you see it's just going through those different semitones of the pitch. Just like the Performer and the LFO, you have your sync settings over here, which you can turn on or off. You have your amplifier restart. This is your amp mode, so you can skip certain steps, just like the Performer, so we can skip some. And then you also have glide options, so you can glide between different notes. You can turn it down and make it less glide. So really cool options there. Same thing, you can shorten these or lengthen your steps, start it wherever you want. You can apply this to multiple parameters such as the cutoff as well. So a lot of cool things you can do with the step sequencer. And given that these can snap to exact values, you can go in here and draw in minor or major arpeggiators and different things like that. Down here in the bottom, let's talk about our macro controls. I touched on these a little bit earlier, but you have 8 different controls to choose from. And these are just really quick, easy access controls to modulate whatever you want and have quick access to it. So I can take number 2 and I can drag it over to the wavetable position and I can turn this down. You can also relabel them by simply double clicking. So we can say WT-POS, and now when I change this, it'll change the wavetable position. Just as if I were doing this. See, I'm going negative. If we did it the other way, it would match the knob, so. And you can drag these to multiple parameters as well. So you could have this here, for instance, and have a reverb and have this control the reverb as well as the wavetable. So a really easy way to have macro controls. What's great is on a lot of the presets, these are already defined for you, so you can quickly just grab them and change and make different adjustments and really affect the sound by using the macro controls. I love those. Another thing to note, when you right-click on any parameter, you can actually use it for different MIDI options. So you can assign your MIDI controller to control those parameters. And once you've assigned them, you can actually just save the MIDI. So you can have different setups. And this is what I showed you earlier in the options. You can have different MIDI templates saved. So if you want these 8 knobs to be controlled by these 8 knobs, you can, or if you want your LFO to be controlled by this knob, you can have different saved settings for those by simply MIDI mapping them and clicking Save MIDI. Within the macro controls, you also have these 4 options, and we're going to start with key tracking. I'm going to drag this over to my wavetable position, and we're going to reverse this So it's like this. Now you'll notice if I play higher octaves, it's going to be a sine wave, and if I play lower octaves, it's going to be a square wave. See how it's a sine wave, and now let's go lower, it's going to be more like a square wave. So that's really cool. You can use key tracking to determine different types of modulation. You also have velocity. Same thing, if I play a note hard, it's going to be more of a sine wave. If I play it soft, it's going to be more of a square wave. Sine wave, I'm going to play it soft. It's a square wave. We have aftertouch. This keyboard doesn't have aftertouch, but if you are using a keyboard with aftertouch, when you push down on the note and then push further down, you're going to be able to control different parameters. That's great for using a filter or things like that. And then you also have this random trigger option, which literally just triggers randomness based off whatever you're doing. You notice how it's never the same. If we put that on something like the pitch, you're really going to hear a difference. Let me turn it off here. And we'll random trigger 12 steps. I'm going to play one note. Totally random. So that's another really cool option. All right, the final tabs here. Let's start with the oscillator tab. I'm currently set to monophonic, and we're going to get to the voicing tab. But for the oscillator tab, we're on monophonic, and you have this first option, which is glide, and that allows you to glide between notes based off this time value here. When it's set to equal, it's the same amount of time regardless of how close the notes are together. If it's set to rate, it's going to change the glide time depending on whether the notes are closer together or further apart. See how there's almost no glide? And if I go down here, there's a lot of glide. So that's the two options there. Next to that, we have pitch bend. You can go up 24, double click to reset, or down. That just changes your pitch bend on your keyboard. Here we have our oscillator phases, and how this works, I'm going to turn this oscillator on. We're set to square wave, so we have two oscillators playing at the same time, and what you're going to hear is that they're going to sound different every time I trigger the note. See how it never sounds the same? Now if we turn restart via gate, it's the same every time. It just resets the position of the wave between the oscillators, and you can actually go and decide where you want it to start. So you can say start at 90 if you want, or you can leave them all at 0. So if you want the same consistent sound every single time, turn on restart via gate. Next to that, we have vibrato. On a new sound, vibrato is always going to be macro 1. Let's turn it up and see what it sounds like. You have mono, which is just like I described before in the LFO and the performer. So if I add in more notes, it's just going to make sure it triggers the same vibrato on time. Next to that, we have an internal envelope, which you can use for things like the glide time or vibrato if you want. The next tab here is key tracking for our oscillators. Your source is over here. This is your different oscillators, 1, 2, 3. You have your modulation oscillator, and you'll also notice you have an insert effect, and that's because under the insert effects, you do have a frequency shifter, which controls pitch. So this controls the pitch of the oscillators based on the key that you're pressing. So right now it's linear, so it's going to be standard. If we change this to user, we can actually draw in our own wave like this. And now you're going to notice oscillator 1 is going to play different notes than oscillator 2. We can make it more drastic. Or you can flip it. You can, if you double click these, it'll reset them. So you can bring this here and bring this one low, and now oscillator 1 will play high octaves while oscillator 2 plays low octaves, but in the opposite direction. So that's kind of interesting. You can do some really cool stuff, and you can also turn them off. Notice how one just stays on one note. So you can control all that here. You really wouldn't mess with this too much, but you can if you want to do some cool experimental stuff. You have the options there. This next tab is key tracking for the filters. I have a scream filter set, and you can hear what that sounds like without key tracking on. Now let's turn key tracking on. See how it's fully open on this key? But as we keep going, it's going to filter it more. Now you also have another option down here which controls the second parameter. For this, it's going to be the scream. So if I turn it up and if I turn it down, controls this second parameter here, and that's key tracking for the filter. You have two options, set 1 and set 2, so you can have two different adjustments, or you can turn them off. The voicing tab, this gives you control over all of your voicing. So to start, this is our voicing section here. You can set how many voices you want, up to 64 voices. Remember, the more voices, the heavier it's going to be on your CPU. So I like to just leave this around 16 for the most part. You can have multiple voices playing at once. Think of this as if you were playing one note, that would be one person singing. If you had it on 4, it's like 4 people singing the exact same note. So it's just going to sound louder. It's not going to sound any different because there's no additional harmonics. Now, right now we're set to polyphonic, which means you can play multiple notes at one time. We can do monophonic, which only allows you to play one note at one time. Here it just jumps to the next note and doesn't continue. And then you have mono rotate. And the difference is with mono rotate, it fades the last note out quickly to eliminate pops when the next note begins. Compared to monophonic. Hear how you're getting those pops? That's the difference between those. Within each voicing style, you also have the trigger type. So this is for modulation, it would be always, so it's always going to re-trigger the modulation. And you also have legato, so if you're holding a note, then you play another one, it would then re-trigger the modulation. Here's an example. If we were on monophonic and it was set to always, every note I play, it's going to re-trigger the modulation. If it's on legato, hear how it doesn't re-trigger that envelope every single time. You also have legato triller, which is great for doing bends between different notes. So I'm going to turn glide on. We'll just leave this on equal. And now I can let go of a note and it'll bend back to it. This is with it off. See how it stops? This is with it on. Goes back to the previous notes. That's legato triller. Unison spread, I have 4 voices playing right now, and if I play a note, it's going to sound loud but with one voice. If we turn this on, this is a way old school synthesizers used to make sounds bigger and sound more stereo, like it was playing multiple voices. It's set between 0 and 1 semitone, and this slider controls between them. Right now it's set to centered. As I turn this up, it's going to symmetrically spread the harmonics around the main pitch by playing one note. And a little goes a long way. This can also be modulated. You can turn this up to 12. And then you also have an option for chord, which alternates the pitch above and below. So if it's set to 12 and I go all the way up, it's going to go plus 12, minus 24, so on and so on. And that is unison spread for pitch cutoff. You can also do this for wavetable position. So I have AI set as my wavetable type, the wave position's in the middle, and as I turn this up, it's going to change the wavetable for each voice. So it's like me having multiple oscillators exactly matching this one, and each voice has a wavetable set in a different position. So that's really cool. And then aside from that, you also have pan position, which can be set to full inverse or full, and this just shifts the voices around the stereo field. So if I turn this on, And move it while I play that chord, you hear those voices changing different positions. The routing page. This allows you to adjust the routing of different modules. As I showed you earlier, you can send oscillator 3 to bypass the filter, the insert effects, and go straight to the master output. You can also do things like put your insert effects before your filter. Here's an example of a distortion insert effect after the filter. So the sound is going from the oscillator into the filter and then into the insert. Or we can do it where the sound goes from the oscillator, then to the insert effect, and then to the filter. And now the filter is happening after the insert effect. So you can't have two of these selected in one place as far as insert effects go. You have to have them in different areas of the chain. But again, you can adjust everything, and all you do is simply click to make the changes. You don't have to draw any lines or set any ins and outs. It's very straightforward. All you have to do is just follow them and go into the next module. There's certain things you can't change, such as the effects. Those are always going to be at the end of the chain. But you can change things like the bypass to go into the effects instead of going only into the EQ, or you can change the insert to happen after all of the filters and insert one. So again, lots of options for routing, and all you do is simply click to change them. The last page is the global page, and here you have some pretty basic and really cool options. The first one, initiate patch, it's just going to clear everything. Pretty straightforward. You have global tune, so if you want to tune something up half a semitone, you can. You have your preset BPM. This is great if you're doing something with a step sequencer. You can actually set the BPM if you're not syncing to a DAW. You have reset and external sync, which would be for a DAW. Here you have stop hold envelope. So earlier I showed you the envelope with hold on it. You can click here and it'll stop the hold, and you can also stop it on sequencers. Before I get to this section, over here, pretty straightforward, you have global quality. Most of the time it's going to be set to ultra, just like it is up here. And your preset quality you can set down here. Nowadays, most modern computers can handle being set on ultra, even if you have a ton of voices. So ultra is going to be the best quality. But if you are using something with 50 or 60 voices, you can bring it down to eco and save some CPU. Now, my favorite part is the randomize option, and I have a preset loaded up just to show how some of these features work. You can click in the boxes and drag up or down to control how much it will randomize. And you have different options here: oscillators, filters, insert effects, and your master effects. This is what controls what is being randomized. So let's look at the filters here, and let's go to the parameter tab. We're going to click it, and under filters, I will click randomize. And you can see how it adjusts those parameters. We can randomize the modulation depth. You can randomize the connections, and it'll change out the modulation connections. See, now there's some envelopes, some key triggers in there. You can do the type set. Notice the filters types are changing. And you can do a matrix. The matrix is mainly for this modulation oscillator down here. So if we hit, you're going to see it's going to change the matrix. You can also randomize all. One thing to note is this keep oscillator pitch, and I think that's important. If you check that and you're randomizing parameters, it's going to keep the pitch the same so you don't get crazy pitch amounts. With that off, see how the pitch is changing? So it might not be too musical there. This is really cool for being able to just randomize and come up with really cool ideas. You can do this on the master effects. And on top of that, if you like the settings of a specific patch, you can actually copy and paste those to new presets. So it makes it really easy to create all your own presets just by using the random features. And that's awesome. Now that we know the ins and outs of Massive, let's load a few presets and see if we can figure out which modules are affecting the presets and adjust the parameters to fit the sound we are going for. Here we are in Machine. I already have a beat. Let's play it back. Pretty straightforward. I found a cool patch called Out in the Woods that I really like, but I'm not liking what's happening with the step sequencer. So I like some of the notes, but I don't like all of them. So what I want to do is actually change this to just be 4 notes. And we're going to turn restart on. So now it's restarting every time as it should. Let's change this to 4 so it slows down a little bit. I'm also not liking this noise paper, and because I hear it, I know it's noise, so I can just turn it off. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is make sure snap to grid is on, which it is. This step sequencer is going to the pitch of oscillator 3, and it's set to 12, so that's perfect. So now we could just lower this, so this will be a D note. That's 0, maybe we go a 5th. And then maybe we do a 3rd and a 2nd. Just like that. Just knowing where to look is what makes this so easy. So now I'm going to record this in there, and then we'll do another one. Can also turn the reverb up a little. I see it's going to mod 5. Okay, so now I want to do some bass, and I found a cool patch called Foundation Roots, and this is what it sounds like. So there's a few things going on that I want to change, and there's a few things I want to do to enhance the overall sound. The first thing, I want to add distortion because it's bass and I want it to punch through. So I'm going to turn on an insert effect, and let's use the hard clipper. Let me turn down the drive a little. Now I'm hearing reverb. I don't want reverb on my bass, so I'm just going to turn it off. Could also use the macro control down here, which is going to reverb 6. That's better. I'm noticing it is set to polyphonic, so let's go and change this to monophonic. The glide is a bit out of control, so we'll have to change that. But I also want to be able to hold a note, hit another note, and then let go and it go back to that note. So to do that, we're going to turn on legato triller. That's nice. Let's go over to the oscillator, tone down the glide a little. Just those simple adjustments made a huge difference on this bass, and knowing what to look for is what made it so easy to go in here and tweak and have it fit my project, and that's the whole point here. Let's record some bass. Cool, I'm just gonna do a little arranging. Let's play this whole thing back. And that's how to use everything in Massive. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check out how to use everything in Massive X. Thanks for watching, and get more info on Massive at nativeinstruments.com.